What do you think of the political process that has been there so far that pertain to climate change?
Well, the political process internationally started really in 1992 with the Framework Convention, and all of the negotiations that happened under the banner of the United Nations continue under this Framework Convention on Climate Change. And the next round of these negotiations is going to take place in Copenhagen in December. And there is very high expectation from many organizations that a lot will be achieved at Copenhagen. But the history of these negotiations, I think, suggests something different. So we've had 17 years of international negotiations, and one of the problems with this is that by trying to create a global framework, which everyone signs up to, that is 190 nations under the UN, it's very difficult to get agreement about what this framework should look like. This idea of multilateralism, that we can get good international environmental governance through a multilateral process, in climate change it hasn't worked. It did work for the Montreal Protocol. This was the mechanism that was created to control the emissions of CFCs that destroy stratospheric ozone. My argument, and the argument of a few other people as well now, is that we should not place all of our hopes on getting an international agreement signed by everybody. Instead, we should look for agreements that are between different sectors. Maybe an individual nation can promote. In my own country, in the UK, we have established a law of parliament that says that the country has to reduce its emissions by 80% by the year 2050. Now, we've decided to do that in Britain, irrespective of what the international negotiations have produced. So that's an example of where just taking unilateral action may actually create more progress.
Are you advocating then countrywide solutions or even solutions at, say, regional levels within country or interactions between sectors?
Yeah, it's this idea of multi-level governance, that we can do things at different levels, at local levels, at regional levels, at national levels, and maybe across nations by focusing on particular sectors. For example, looking at car manufacturers, or maybe looking at the aviation sector, and trying to get that sector, which is a global industry, to decide whether there are agreements that they could negotiate within their own business communities. Or at the local level, it might be local authorities taking matters into their own hands and deciding that there are things that should be done locally that will improve the quality of the environment within a particular city or town or region. This happened, for example, in Delhi a few years ago when many of the liquid fuels moved from petroleum to CNG, and this was a decision that was taken by the municipality of Delhi. It's improved the air quality, and it has actually also reduced the emissions of CO2 into the atmosphere. But it was a decision that was taken locally, and it didn't have to wait until we have an agreement signed by 190 national governments.
What do you think about emission targets for nations?
Well, I think emissions targets for nations is what we have historically been talking about ever since climate change has been negotiated. But it's actually not very helpful, I think, just to focus on the gross emissions of CO2, because those sort of numbers end up becoming argued over. Should it be 20%? Should it be 40%? Should it be by 2030? Should it be by 2050? But rather than focusing on the national emissions, actually focus again on individual sectors. So in Europe, for example, the car manufacturers have agreed amongst themselves that they will reduce the carbon emissions of new vehicle engines every year until the year 2015. So they're measuring the carbon efficiency of their engines, and they're saying that we will agree to increase the efficiency of these engines year by year. Now, this is again a more helpful way of thinking about emissions targets, because it's too easy for a government or for a politician, a national politician, to say we will reduce our emissions by 80% in 40 years' time. What we really need are short-term targets that apply to particular sectors, because then that sector can take some responsibility for action.
But the pressure of international commitments should always be there.
We do need a global protocol, because if we don't have a global protocol, then people won't bother doing anything at all. My argument is that we've been pursuing that route now for 17 years, and it hasn't delivered anything, really. The Kyoto Protocol that we do have wasn't signed by America, wasn't signed by India or China, and those countries that did sign it, most of them haven't met their targets. So the question is, does this demand for an international framework really drive forward action or does it act as a delaying strategy? As people are continually waiting and waiting and waiting until they get the global deal that they want. In the meantime, there are actually many good reasons why individual nations, why individual cities, why individual sectors, why individual citizens even may decide to take actions of their own. Often, maybe not to try to slow global warming, but actually taking actions that will improve their own local environmental conditions, maybe improve the way in which a particular sector uses energy. I mean, there's a huge amount to be done to improve the way we use energy efficiently, and that has a cost saving for a business or for a nation. So there are many reasons why environmentally friendly or low carbon friendly decisions or technologies could be introduced, but don't rely on having a global international agreement in place.